So All-Star reserves just got announced, and the internet, and myself included, is upset with this list a little bit. And when I say just got announced, I mean just got announced. They announced the list at 7 o'clock. It's 7:30 when I'm recording this. Let's just go ahead and dive into this and look at who were the All-Star reserves for both the Eastern and Western Conference. And then I'll give you my list, and we'll talk about potentially how we should change how we do All-Star moving forward. All right, so the reserves for the Western Conference: Paul George, SGA, Jaren Jackson Jr., Dame, Lauri Markkanen, Ja Morant, Sabonis. I got some question marks here, but let's get to the East. East, we have Bam, Jaylen Brown, DeMar DeRozan, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Halliburton, Jrue Holiday made the team, okay, and Julius Randle, shout out to him. Just a couple of first reactions that just kind of surprised me a little bit. I'm really surprised to see Paul George on this list, considering he's in the front court, and I feel like there's some deserving names in the front court that could have gotten above him. We'll get to that in a second. No disrespect to Jaren Jackson Jr., no idea why he's on this list. Once again, I just think there's some other guys in the front court in the Western Conference that were more deserving ahead of him. Shout out to both DeMar DeRozan and Jrue Holiday for making the Eastern Conference lists. I'm not gonna lie, they didn't even cross my mind when I make my balance. I'm not saying they're having a bad year by any means at all. I just didn't think they were having all-star years, personally. I'm just gonna go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off and get into my list. What I have for the All-Star reserves are, we'll do Western Conference since we did that first. And the two guard spots, I have Ja Morant and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, both well-deserving in my book. My three front court spots: Lauri Markkanen, Domantas Sabonis, Anthony Davis. So I took off Jaren Jackson Jr., I took off Paul George for my lists because, and you might be like, yo, AD hasn't played, Hawk, what are you doing? If you can't say AD hasn't played and Zion was a starter, they played basically the same amount of games. I want to say one is at 28 and one's at 29, basically the same amount of games. The big difference for me is, and no disrespect to Jaren Jackson Jr., no disrespect to Paul George is having a solid season. His numbers are right in line with what he's been doing throughout most of his career and his prime. Jaren Jackson Jr. also having a great, amazing season. He's my front runner for Defensive Player of the Year award. But what Anthony Davis was doing before he went down to injury, and what he's kind of sort of been doing since he's been back, he's had a couple of good games recently. Just a couple of nights ago, he had 27-9 against the Knicks on some good efficiency. So he's getting back into the rhythm. But what he was doing before he got injured was MVP and Defensive Player of the Year level of play. Like, he had an argument for both right before he went down with injury. So to me, since he's back, he's got to make an all-star team. And then my two reserves for out West are Damian Lillard and De'Aaron Fox. I think Fox is well deserving of an all-star nod. At the time of recording right now, the Kings are third in the Western Conference. And before you say, hey, Hawk, how do you have the Lakers having two all-stars? To me, the all-star game is an individual award. Like, if you having an outstanding season and it just happens to work out for you for your position that you make a team, that's cool with me. Are the Lakers 13th in the Western Conference right now? Yes. But I feel like at this point in the season, we all are aware that the Western Conference is so close that depending on if you have a good week or a bad week, you can slide up or down 3-4 spots in the West. That's how close it is right now. Gotta have Dame in there averaging 30 a game right now on some solid efficiency. We already talked about De'Aaron Fox. I think he's deserving to be here. SGA, Ja, Lauri, Domantas Sabonis. The NBA had those as well, so I feel like I don't need to go that in depth. I will say though, SGA, Lauri, Sabonis, those are all guys who going into this season, me personally, I didn't think I'd see them in an all-star game or even be making the argument that they belong in an all-star game. But shout out to them. They've had an amazing season so far. And hey, Kings fans, you were right. I was wrong. Y'all was telling me y'all had an all-star. And Sabonis, personally, I didn't think he'd be an all-star this year. Going into it, didn't think he'd be bad, but it's just I didn't think there'd be an opportunity for him. But he's hooping right now, and you can make the argument he's the third best center in the league. He's well deserving of an all-star spot. Just like from the Western Conference, I had two guys that were different. In the Eastern Conference, I have two guys that are different. Me personally, DeMar DeRozan, Jrue Holiday, shout out to y'all. DeMar, we know you a bucket getter, mid-range assassin. Jrue, we know you're one of the best defenders in the league, and honestly, you've been holding your weight and holding your own offensively for the Bucks while Chris Middleton has been out. But neither of y'all, to me, are all-stars. My Eastern Conference all-star reserves, I got James Harden and Tyrese Halliburton, the two guys who are leading the NBA in assists. Tyrese Halliburton has the official leading in assists, and James Harden has the unofficial leading in assists just because Harden hasn't played enough games so far this season. In the front court, I have Joel Embiid, Pascal Siakam, and Julius Randle. I've been saying all year that Julius Randle looks amazing. I think the addition of Jalen Brunson has been huge for him, and just having a steady point guard to help run that offense, and he's benefiting from it. Joel Embiid, MVP conversations. I don't think we need to explain anymore. Should have been a starter in my mind. I'm still a little salty about it, but I'm over it. It's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of thing. And 5 years from now, when we look back on this, we're just going to remember he was an all-star. Very few people, maybe some Sixers fans, but very few people are going to remember that he came off the bench. Round out my Eastern Conference reserves, I have Jaylen Brown and Bam Adebayo. Me personally, I felt that Pascal Siakam and James Harden were deserving of being on an all-star team. I'll admit, I went back and forth for a while between Pascal Siakam and Jimmy Butler. They both do very similar things for their team, and especially in terms of offense. They're both their team's go-to scorer when they need a bucket. And a lot of the offense rides on both of these guys' shoulders on two teams that a lot of people, myself included, would say is lacking some offense or could at least be better offensively. The difference maker for me is just this season, it's just felt like Pascal's been a little more versatile defensively. And honestly, that's just due to God-given size. He has the ability to guard more positions. No disrespect to Jimmy. If you have Jimmy, that's cool with me. I get the nod to Pascal. James Harden made my list because is he James Harden of Houston? No. But when you're leading the league in assists, the playmaking he's doing for the Sixers on a night-to-night basis is absolutely phenomenal. The scoring is still there. The three ball is falling. To me, he's an all-star. For a quick side-by-side so you can see what the NBA's all-star reserves were and my all-star reserves were. For the most part, to me, the coaches did get it right. I like a lot of the pieces that they put in here. Lauri Markkanen was well-deserving. I just think Fox and AD could have made it over Jaren Jackson Jr. and Paul George. Same thing out east. To me, James Harden and Pascal Siakam could have got in there and should have got in there over Jrue Holiday and DeMar DeRozan. Now, one of the biggest omissions I'm seeing on Twitter is what's up with Devin Booker and why isn't Devin Booker on this list? I went back and forth with Devin Booker a lot. A lot of people were saying, well, his injuries is the reason he didn't make it. That wasn't the case for me. Between him, Zion, and Anthony Davis, they basically all played the same amount of games. The difference maker for me was not necessarily the amount of games he's missed, it's just the other guards he were going up against. Out of Ja, SGA, Dame, and De'Aaron Fox, the only guy I thought about maybe replacing was De'Aaron Fox. And he's leading the Kings to the 3rd seed in the Western Conference right now. The season he's having is absolutely amazing. If Booker was healthy and the Suns were a higher seed, there's definitely some potential there that De'Aaron Fox could be swapped out for Devin Booker in my book. But with not having seen Booker in what feels like months now, and there's no timeline or timetable for his return, it had to go to De'Aaron Fox for me. I said we were going to talk about the All-Star selection process, and shout out to JJ Redick. If you know me, you know I watch and consume way too much NBA content. One of my favorite guys is JJ. He just had this new series he's starting on his YouTube channel called NBA Islands, and he had a segment on there when he talked about the All-Star selection process and gave a really good in-depth breakdown of the history of the All-Star selection process and how historically, as the league has expanded and as the league continued to add more teams through expansion teams, the ABA merger, things like that, they continued to increase the number of players that were involved in the All-Star games so that it had a better showcase of the best players in the NBA. And he did a really great breakdown of what percentage of the total NBA players actually make the All-Star team. And when the All-Star team first started, because there were so few players and so few teams, it was up to, I want to say 20-25% of the league were All-Stars. Then it got to like 14-15% at one point once they started doing some expansions, ABA merger. But now we're to the point where 9%, I want to say it was 9% of the NBA players make the All-Star team. That's less than 10%. And his suggestion was, and I think it's actually a really good idea, and I agree with him, is to take the All-Star team from 24 players to 30 players, basically just adding 3 more spots on each side. I think that's a really good idea. It just gives the opportunity to at least get closer to 10% of the players. I don't think adding 6 more slots to the All-Star game would dilute the allure of the All-Star by any means, because every year you're going to have some snubs, and every year we've had, and one of the things JJ brought up was the idea of if you do make it to 30, you just don't have injury reserves. You just make the All-Star team, and if you can't play, there's enough guys on that list that the game should still be able to happen, and you can still be an All-Star even if you're injured. Because he went back and looked, I want to say it was since 2005, if I'm not mistaken, was the last time we had an All-Star game where someone wasn't an injury reserve. So for years now, we've gotten used to having more than just 24 All-Stars. So why not just make it official? I'm even cool with the idea of the NBA just picking the top 30 players for the All-Star game, period. Forget the conferences, just the top 30 players. And you might be saying to yourself, it's not that big of a deal. It's just the All-Star game. Why do people care so much? And the NBA, people care about the All-Star game because it matters. It matters in terms of the history of how we remember these players, how we rank these players is based on like, oh, this guy had 7 All-Star appearances, this guy only had 4. We have those types of conversations as NBA fans. All-Star also means a lot to these players because your contracts look a little different if you make a couple of all-star teams. You're eligible for higher pay if you make some all-star teams. Sometimes you have incentives built into your contract if you make an all-star team. So the all-star matters to the players and honestly to the fans as well. Obviously, it's not the end of the world that Paul George, Jaren Jackson Jr., Drew Holiday, and DeMar DeRozan made an all-star team. Do I agree with those picks? No. Am I saying those guys are trash bums and completely undeserving of an all-star selection? Not necessarily either. If there was 30 spots, they probably would make it. I don't know if I'd have put Drew Holiday in there regardless, even if you gave me 35 spots. My point here is these guys are all-star level or all-star caliber guys. Just you're not always going to agree with what the selections were. What changes would you make to the all-star teams? Let me know down in the comments below. And one last thing, because I forgot to do it earlier, if you make it all the way to the end of this video, you are a real one. But in case you forgot who the all-star starters were and just needed a refresher so you have in mind the full list, in the East, you got Giannis, KD, Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, and Kyrie Irving. And in the West, you have LeBron, Jokic, Zion, Steph, and Luka. I'll see you on the next one. I'm out. Peace.